The thing that I want you to take away from this play is I want you to try and make connections to specifically Hamlet. When you get beyond what's going on in the story and just trying to piece together plot points, when you start to analyze what Hamlet is saying and you try and get inside his head, because he's a thinker, because he's emotional, because he wears his heart on his sleeve, it's not that hard to figure out what's going on inside his head. And that is the most important part of this play, is making a connection to understand what exactly is motivating Hamlet, what exactly is going on, to try and anticipate his next move, to try and figure out why there isn't necessarily a next move. And sort of this cat and mouse game between him and Claudius. And so here are some things that I want you to think about. We've so far gone through Act 1, scenes 1 to 3. And in this, we've seen the death of his father. His mother, very soon after the death of his father, has remarried his uncle, and his uncle has assumed the throne. There's a clear conflict between him and his uncle, who is now the king. And he's going through this process of grief that everyone he talks to seems to have moved on. And he's kind of questioning what is going on here, and why is nobody else feeling like I am? So in Act 1, Scene 2, we see King Claudius make this speech about how we possibly could be vulnerable and we need to put on a strong front, and I'm your king and I'm here for you. This is your queen, you already know her. And everyone's excited to move on. Even Laertes, who's the same age as Hamlet, basically, Polonius's son, he's going back to university. He's asked permission, and the king has granted it, and his father has said it's time to go back. And Hamlet, who should be going back, is somewhat being prevented by his new stepfather and his mother, but also I don't think he's ready to go back to university. He's still fresh in losing his father and doesn't really need to be going back to school right away. And so, he looks at his mother's moved on, clearly. Someone else has assumed the throne. His friends are moving on. And he's even going to see Ophelia has been strictly guided by both her father and her brother to stop whatever affections that Hamlet is showing to her. And so he's even going to find out that Ophelia is disconnecting from him as well. So when we look at the character of Hamlet, what's really important to understand going into this first act is that we can see all of these things happening. In the very beginning, he loses his father quite suddenly. He apparently fell asleep in a garden and a snake bit him and he died. And so when you lose somebody very quickly and you don't have time to process, you can stay here for a really long time that you kind of don't move into a stage for a little bit because you're just completely confused how you got blindsided by the loss of this particular person. And then we can even see his anger. His anger comes out by lashing out at his mother. His mother has remarried and he finds it absolutely disgusting that is what she has done, and specifically who she has married. It seems disrespectful in the honor and memory of his father, who is well loved, who was an amazing king, an amazing warrior, remembering he was the one who killed King Fortinbras in a battle. So he's clearly, to make mention of Lion King, right? He's the Mufasa of the Lion Kingdom here. He was a great king. And so he gets angry at his mother for marrying a subsequent partner who isn't the match that his father once was. And so he's stuck between these in the very beginning. We can even see signs of this when he interacts. We see signs of depression when he's interacting with King Claudius. And Claudius says there's a cloud hanging over you all of the time, and it's really time to get over it. He even makes mention of, I don't know if you know this, Hamlet, but my father died, and his father died, and his father died. Like, death is a part of life, and you need to get over it. But Hamlet's bouncing back between these. And see, this is a cycle. And often people say it doesn't go in a circle, like you move from this stage to this stage. You can actually go back and forth here, right? So you can slip back into stage 2, stage 3. There's actually many models of this. There's a 7 stage. But I think for the purpose of talking about Hamlet, it's really good to sort of look at these. When he tries to talk about his father, everyone sort of brushes it off, and we need to talk about the new king. And so he's stuck because he can't move on to bargaining or, finding meaning of what the death of his father means, because no one else is in the same stage as him. And so he's bouncing back and forth between this. So we see him very sad, disconnecting from other people, but we also see him lashing out specifically at his mother. And these are all really important things to pay attention to when we're analyzing the character of Hamlet, because going into the next stages, he's going to be looking at possibly understanding what happened to his father. And this can lead into one of two things: a resolve to understanding what happened, or it's going to fire him up. And so when we look at the cycle of grief, you may not have lost someone very close to you, or gone through these stages that you can clearly identify. What's interesting is that very early on in the pandemic and staying home and quarantining and all of that, a lot of people were talking about mental wellness and making sure that you're okay. But it was also important for us to recognize the grief process of losing the world that we know. And you guys as graduates, losing some of the things that are quite common for everybody else, and it felt like it was being stripped away from you, right? So looking at grief, and it's okay to feel anger, because I know when it comes to those stages of grief, I was going through those stages 100%, where in the beginning, I was a little bit resistant, and I kind of just wanted to go about it. No one we knew was affected, and it just kind of seemed distant from us. But then it became very, very real. And then, we were told to stay home past the 2 weeks after March break. And then, there were so many things. I was frustrated and I was angry, and I wasn't able to figure out. I went through anger and even depression, the idea of just, I don't want to do anything. I'm not motivated. I don't want to do anything. And it was important to honor those feelings, and learning how to manage them, because that's the key thing, is learning how to put out your story or connect to it for your own life, or say that it's okay or not okay. But understanding that it doesn't just have to be death. It can be the loss of things, the loss of the world that you know it. And that for Hamlet can also doubly be true. He's lost his father, but the world as he know it has been flipped upside down, and he doesn't know what to do about it, and he can't move through those stages of grief because he's unmotivated and no one else seems to really listen to him, and he feels isolated and alone. So if you can connect to any of those feelings, you can kind of get in the headspace of what Hamlet's doing or thinking or feeling. And that is so, so, so important. Because going into Hamlet Act 1, Scene 4 and 5, Horatio, we're getting back to that castle scene in the very beginning of Scene 1, and we're going back to thinking about the death of this king and a ghost that keeps appearing with a likeness of him. It looks like him. It's wearing his armor. And so Horatio, the ghost is still appearing, sort of in the background. We're not paying attention to that because there was a few other plot points that we needed to introduce in this first act, which is the whole point. This whole act is the lead in. We get all those details that we need for the entire story, the dynamics, their personalities, all of those things, the conflicts. And then we're moving forward because we need to get back to this ghost and why it's appearing. And for Hamlet, it feels like an opportunity to connect with the one person that he didn't have closure with. And so he's really excited to see what this thing means. But we also need to pay attention to the fact of what ghosts mean to them, right? So paranormal, it could be a demon, it could be something evil. And so there's warnings there, right? There's something not right here. And so the other thing that he needs to pay attention to is the idea of why a ghost is coming back. And in their beliefs, it was because something is unresolved, and they are allowed to come back until that thing is resolved. So there's questions there as to why this ghost is appearing, if it is his father, if it isn't his father. And this further leads into the conflict that we're going to see between him and Claudius. So reading through scene 4 and 5, I've also provided the Audible copy, and it will be really, really important to try and get in the headspace of Hamlet before you get on top of that castle to go see the ghost, to understand why this scene is so important. If you guys have any questions, if you have problems accessing the resources, or you're having trouble reading through it or listening to it, just let me know. Send me an email or a remind. I'd love to take you through it and help you connect to the character of Hamlet.